how is this going to work now? And it does remind us of a time when Mexico was going to pay for the border wall, and he says they did through trade deals. Is this a similar approach?
I think we're taking this with a pretty big grain of salt, especially considering the U.S. already has trade and investment deals inked with these countries, many of them last year during Trump's trip to the region. I think this is a little bit of an out, a way of pivoting. And at the end of the day, the main group that's going to be paying for this is going to be the U.S. taxpayer.
Okay, so it's back to inflation, where we started our conversation this hour with Chair Welch. Give us your broad view on what's happening in the Strait right now. The president saying in that same post that we have a blockade back in effect, but it's for Iran only. Can we use a scalpel to that extent in the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, I think this is largely returning to the operations that existed before the MOU was signed just a few weeks ago. And the U.S. has maintained forces in the region, should be able to snap those back in place relatively quickly. Blockades starting again later today. I think one of the questions we're looking to see, though, is beyond the blockade, is there going to be more escorting of vessels through the strait to kind of guarantee that safe passage? Those operations are very expensive. They're very risky. The U.S. only engaged in true naval escorts under Project Freedom for about a day or so before pulling that operation down. So if the president is really keen on fully reopening the strait, it would probably require those more intensive operations. But again, huge risk, huge cost.
So when we hear about the U.S. Escorting 6 vessels through the strait overnight, transponders off, what kind of military presence are we talking about here? This is fighter jets, helicopters, air cover of any. Are we actually sailing through the strait alongside them?
I think that's where there's a spectrum of options. It can be everything from providing ships a sense of here are the routes to take to we will actually provide you some surveillance and eye in the sky capabilities to give you a heads up on whether threats are coming your way, to overhead actual security coverage, to, yes, the physical escort by naval vessels. That last step is, you know, really brings you to a much larger but much more expensive package and a very risky one, because if you're going to put ships in the strait, you're going to need to provide them additional protection on top of that, which is, again, why that Project Freedom operation ended up being relatively short-lived.
Yeah, not even a day, as we recall. So we're back at war. The president's notified Congress. So it's not only back before the MOU, it's back to the first couple of weeks of kinetic action here. Another day of trading strikes. Do you expect this will continue until further notice? And where are we coming up with all of these targets now that we've in many cases already hit?
Yes, I think we're returning to a lot of tactics that have already been tried in earlier phases of this conflict. And I think our view would be, in a sense, the war never really ended. There was a ceasefire, but there were still strikes through that ceasefire phase. The MOU itself was relatively shaky, and we saw skirmishing happen relatively soon after it was signed. This is just a continuation of that limbo. And what we would say is that we're likely to see a continuation of low-intensity, protracted fighting for the foreseeable future. Neither side wants to back down. Neither side wants to yield. And neither side is really even speaking the same language when it comes to negotiations.
So we're going to start this 60-day countdown, not for a ceasefire, but for war powers? Or is the White House out of the business of keeping that clock?
I think the White House is out of that business. I'm not sure they were ever in that business. Well, they don't want to give Congress the vote on it. I think the other thing is, yes, we are continuing this conflict, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to return to the early days of the war, that high intensity of strikes and fighting. I think both sides want to avoid that.
Interesting. He had an interview yesterday. It was on the Hugh Hewitt show, the president, that is. Said the U.S. will hit Iran very hard in the coming days, calling the Pickaxe Mountain nuclear site a possible target, he said, quote, for a nice big fat shot, unquote. Was that part of the strikes that we did against the nuclear infrastructure last summer?
We've heard him repeatedly reference this idea of like a job. To a certain extent, he says unfinished, that we want to go back and restrike those facilities. But then at the same time, the material is buried and they can't access it, so we don't need to worry about it. We'll just monitor it. He's kind of flip-flopped on this point. But he has referenced the idea of going back and striking those sites, in addition to threats against, you know, more critical energy infrastructure and bridges and that sort of thing. So I think that those are some of the things that they are toying with in terms of escalation possibilities, but those come with extremely high risks of bringing the conflict to a point where you have a true breakdown in negotiations and talks. He's been saying talks could continue, they could restart even though the MOU is dead. If the U.S. were to engage in those kinds of strikes, I think we would see more of a reset back to where we were earlier in the war.
Just quickly before you leave us, what's the biggest threat right now in the Strait? Missiles, drones, both?
All of the above, plus fast attack craft.
Wow.